What is going on, my planting people? My name is Lithius and welcome back to Roots Ready. In another episode looking back at some of the oldest plants in my collection, today I'm going to be reviewing my oldest Anthurium. Yes, this is going to be a 2.5 year journey into this plant. So before we get into the plant, let's go all the way back to the beginning. As I said, this was the very first Anthurium that I ever purchased. This was during the boom, the plant hype, and I think I actually got it for quite a good deal. And funnily enough, this was the last purchase I ever made from Europe before the Brexit happened. I remember in the UK, these plants were selling for about £60. They were quite dear. But I managed to get it from the Netherlands, from a plant nursery called plants.com. It's a huge one. It's very well known here and across Europe. And I think I only got it for about £22, or including postage and packaging. So the plant on its own was maybe around £17. So, you know, for me, it was a great deal. I remember getting this plant, and I'll see if I can find any footage of it when I first got it. And I was absolutely blown away. It was gorgeous. I think it was the first velvet leaf plant that I've ever had. So, you know, I was in awe of the leaves, and, you know, it was one of the ones I kept looking at. I was like, this is going to be like the centerpiece of my collection at the time. And this was before this whole setup behind me even started to be a thought in my head. I had them all in my room, and I had it on top of a sort of a makeshift shelf thing. In fact, it's this very same shelf that you see behind me over here that's holding a lot of my plants. But what I did was it couldn't quite fit between the chest of drawers and the ceiling. So I sort of just kind of wedged it in there. And what happened was, because this, in order for this to work, it's not screwed in. It sort of uses springs to push it against the floor and wedge it in between the ceiling and the floor. But the way that it's designed, it's not quite, it's kind of too big to do it between a cupboard or a chest of drawers and the ceiling. So I just had to sort of wedge it in without the springs, and which meant that there wasn't that pressure holding it in. I remember I was in here in my living room and I heard this massive crash. So I ran into my room, and there were a lot of plant casualties, and this Clarinervium was sadly one of them. So unfortunately, the Clarinervium actually lost most of its leaves, and we were left with just these two still pretty gorgeous leaves. However, in that mishap, it actually opened my eyes to the world of semi-hydro. This plant is a world of firsts, right? So it was the first Anthurium, but it was actually the first plant I experimented with in semi-hydro. This one in particular is in leca, and it has been in leca for the longest time. In fact, I did a whole series of me transitioning this plant from like a sphagnum moss mix into leca. I'm going to link it in the end screen so you can go have a look at that entire journey. Anyway, that was successful. I remember I kept on going back in every couple of weeks. It was probably overkill, but I kept going back in every couple of weeks just to sort of check on the root situation. It was more for giving you guys an update on what the plant is doing, but you know, it was also for me because I was a bit curious as well, just to sort of see. But I wouldn't recommend you digging out your plant out of its substrate every couple of weeks. That was just for that sort of initial transition period. Anyway, that was completely successful, and based on the success of this plant, I now have all of my Anthuriums apart from one in pon. I have transitioned away from leca more to pon just because it sort of holds the plant a bit better. I find that leca is a bit looser, so plants sort of tend to move about until they really have an established root system, and you'll see a bit of that of the wobble on this plant as well. Because pon is a lot finer, it sort of holds and the plant in place a bit better, and in my experience I find that that sort of absorption of the water, that wicking effect, is a lot more effective in pon than it is in leca. But let me show you exactly what this plant is looking like today. There we go. This, ladies and gentlemen, is my Anthurium Clarinervium. It's in the exact same pot. I'm going to try to make sure it doesn't hit the ceiling, but it's in the exact same pot as it was before, in the same leca. I think it is indeed time for a repot, or at least another opportunity to sort of push the plant down a bit in the pot, just so it doesn't wobble on the top. Because as you can see, a lot of that growth at the top is very top heavy basically. So it means that the plant is wobbling and shifting. At the moment, this plant lives just underneath that suspension shelf behind me. There's another grow light, so this one and one other Anthurium lives there. So that means it can actually just lean up against the wall, and it uses that as a form of support. But as you can see, this plant has been highly successful. It's got quite a few leaves. It hasn't really got any pups. It has at times attempted to pup and sort of replicate itself and establish that really strong base. However, that hasn't happened. And it hasn't taken off, I should say. But this is where we got to so far. This plant is religious about the inflorescence that it produces. And honestly, I would jump to this section in terms of the challenges with this plant. I would say that I have never been able to pollinate an Anthurium Clarinervium. Now, I think it might be because the first few times that I tried it, I tried to hybridize it with some other plants like my Forgetii, my Anthurium magnificum cross regale, and I don't think this plant can hybridize. I might be wrong, correct me if I am, but it never takes. It honestly just sort of starts the process. It looks like it might, and then the whole inflorescence will just shrivel and die. I have also tried to self-pollinate this plant, and again, no success. So for me, that's the biggest challenge. And with Anthuriums, the reason why they are my favorite plant is because of, you know, you have the ability to sort of play around with it, extend your collection, hybridize as well, so come up with some really unique hybrids, and also over time sort of pull out the exact genes and traits that you want in a particular plant. But with this, I just find that I struggle a little bit. But that's enough of the challenges or the negatives. Let me tell you some of the positives. I would say that this plant is the easiest velvet leaf Anthurium. And to be fair, I think that does it an injustice, because just as an Anthurium in itself, it's a super easy plant to look after. It doesn't require that high humidity. Of course, if you can give it to it, do, and it will appreciate you for that, but it's not gonna just shrivel and die on you. Of course, I've got some shriveling ends over here, but that's because yeah, this plant has had a bit of a dry spell. I usually just go in and sort of lightly mist this plant, but I didn't realize that the reservoir was drying up. But that does go to show you that this plant is very resilient, because despite it going through that dry spell, it continues to put out inflorescence. And there's also in the center there, right there, that is a new leaf. So not only is it producing new inflorescence, but it's also producing new leaves. I think I do have to get into the habit of just chopping these inflorescence off when they start to come in, because honestly, it doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't grow. It doesn't do anything for the plant apart from slow it down. And slow, I would say this plant is. It's certainly not the quickest Anthurium in my collection. However, what it does do is it holds on to its leaves very well. A lot of these leaves might be around that 2.5 year mark. In terms of its lighting requirements, honestly, this plant, as I said, is super simple and easy to look after. It doesn't require a whole lot of light. In fact, I would even go as far as saying that it doesn't even want to have too much light. This is a sort of a bottom dwelling plant. It lives under the canopy, if you've seen it growing in its natural habitat. So it doesn't want too much light. It also doesn't want no light at all. So you've got to find that right balance. So this can be pulled back away from a window and be just fine, I would say, in my opinion. Fertilizer for this plant. To be fair, I don't fertilize this one as often as I do others. Imagine if I do just pull myself up on it and just make sure that it is fertilized very regularly. I think this plant will be an absolute beast by now. But that goes to show you that this plant will keep on kicking as long as you provide it with the absolute basis, the bare minimum. I tend to fertilize this one, as with my other plant routine, just once every other watering. So because this one has a reservoir, well, it hasn't had one for a little while, but when it does have a reservoir, I would like to water that. So every other reservoir basically is when I would give this a good balanced semi-hydro or hydroponic fertilizer. I find that it responds very, very well to that. So if you're in the market for a plant that is easy to care for, uniquely striking, beautiful, something that can steal the show, then this is your best bet. This is the Anthurium Clarinervium. And what a gorgeous plant it is. Just look at those heart-shaped leaves. But that is everything on this plant, and a quick update on how it's doing. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, keep planting.